I will send you a copy of this afterwards, so in case you missed something, but I want to thank all of you for being here. If you've been to any of my webinars before, you'll know that the thing that I like the least is that I can't see any of you. So that is tough. So I do want to make sure, though, that you know you can ask questions at any time. So if you do have a question, you can just type it to me in the chat box, and I will do my best to answer any questions. And then a few of you sent me questions ahead of time, and so I will also work on answering those as we get started too. So we're going to try and keep this to around 45 minutes or so, and then for sure have time at the end to ask questions, and it might be shorter, who knows. So this is normally a, oh, let's see, you can barely hear me. Let me try muting and see if that, and then unmuting. All right, is that better? Can you hear me better now? Anyone? Oh. Okay, all righty. So, okay, so anyway, I will try and also talk a little bit louder here too. So, okay, so our main goals today is first of all to talk about the importance of sleep. We probably already know those, but just want to highlight a few things, and then talk about the keys to falling asleep and the keys to staying asleep. I feel like parents sometimes will either have issues with their children falling asleep, but then once they're asleep, they sleep well, or they have a child who falls asleep pretty easily but wakes up a lot through the night. So I want to address those two concerns. So, and then again, we'll have time for questions at the end. So, all right, so there's my two beautiful little boys. They're not so little anymore, but I think we all appreciate seeing our kids sleeping well. And so I wanted to include that picture to be inspirational. So why is sleep important? So sleep is food for the brain. While we are sleeping, everything that we have learned goes into our long-term memory. So this is especially important for our children who are learning things all the time. And so sleep is where those new learned behaviors, new learned information gets imprinted into our long-term memory. There's many important body functions and brain activities that occur during sleep. Sleep is also crucial to the management of being alert and awake. And as we'll talk about in a few minutes too, sleep is on the opposite side of the continuum of being awake and alert. So oftentimes, if there's a sleep issue, there may be issues happening during the day with our level of alertness. And then this is a statistic that I got a couple of years ago, so perhaps it's even changed, but 69% of American infants, children, and teens are sleep deprived. So I found that to be pretty alarming, especially as we go through these next slides and see how important our sleep really is. So what does sleep deprivation look like? So from an emotional standpoint, we'll start to see kids who are easily frustrated. They lose it over the little things that normally maybe wouldn't bother them now have become something that is more annoying to them. They maybe are more reactive to those little things. They may become more upset about changes in their routine. And it may take you longer for you to help them calm down. And so big things happen to the emotional system when we are tired. And probably as adults, we maybe fall into some of that too when we're sleep deprived. So what happens to the body? We become more clumsy. It's fairly interesting that you are 80% more likely to end up in the emergency room when you're sleep deprived, just because of that clumsiness and being more prone to accidents. We'll often see hyperactivity. And I feel like this is especially true later in the afternoon, as well as around a bedtime. So sometimes we'll see these kids have kind of a second wind. And I just want to, you know, encourage you not to take that as a sign that they aren't ready for bed. What actually might be happening is that you may have missed their window for going to bed. And so that's when you start to see a child's body kind of rev up because they're trying to keep their brain awake. Sometimes we'll see kids need to be woken up in the morning, but that isn't always the case for sleep deprivation. Sometimes kids are just more of a night owl than a morning lark. So that isn't the only sign that the child might need more sleep, but it is certainly something to think about. We will see cravings of carbohydrates or sugar. Again, especially later in the day and evening, we will see these things. That has to do with our blood sugar. And so they're, you know, essentially, again, trying to keep themselves awake. So we see the cravings of those particular types of foods. We may see an increase in stomach aches or headaches, and then also an increase in anxiety. So some pretty common signs that we might see with other things as well. But again, it's just always good to look at whether or not sleep is the culprit. Okay. Attention and focus also decline with sleep deprivation. So we will see, you know, sensory seeking type behaviors. So kids might start to pick on other kids. They might start to pick on their pets. Again, especially late in the afternoon and early evening. They need maybe more help to stay on task. So you're maybe having to give them more verbal cues to pay attention and, you know, more assistance to stay on, you know, their task, especially with those kids who are needing to do homework in the afternoons or evenings. They may need a little more help with that if they're tired. They may have difficulty making decisions. So things that normally they would decide pretty easily, you might see that they are not making those as easily. They may not listen to you as well. Excessive talking can be a symptom of sleep deprivation, and then being forgetful. So, and then in social situations, we may see kids who become more bossy and demanding. They may have their feelings hurt more easily, difficulty being patient, irritated by others, forgetting the rules, debating the rules, negotiating, those types of things. And I think it's important to point out that just 41 minutes of sleep deprivation can cause some of these issues that we're seeing, especially with attention and being alert. So that's not much. 41 minutes is not a lot of time. So what does adequate sleep lead to? Obviously, the opposite of all of those things that we just talked about. So we see higher grade point averages, better math and reading skills, improved focus and attention, fewer conflicts, fewer accidents from a physical standpoint. The immune system improves, fewer cavities and gum disease. That's likely related to that craving carbohydrates and sweets, as well as the lower susceptibility to obesity. So all sorts of good things that adequate sleep leads to. And I probably didn't need to convince you of that, because all of you are here because you have some sort of concern about you or a loved one who's not getting enough sleep. So what is enough sleep? I think I get this question asked of me a lot, how much time everybody needs to sleep. So infants are going to sleep 14 to 18 hours. As the infant grows into their toddler years, 12 to 18-month-olds need 14 to 15 hours, including 2 naps. So usually a morning nap and an afternoon nap. Toddlers, going to decrease that a little bit to 11 hours, but 1 2-hour nap as well. Preschoolers, 11 to 12 hours. They might not be napping anymore, depending on their preschool schedule, but they still need close to the same amount of time as a toddler. And then 5 to 6-year-olds, I don't have this on there, but they need 11 hours. So again, they're kind of bridging the gap between the preschoolers and the school age kids who need 10 hours. So they're going to need approximately 11. Adolescents need 9.25 hours and adults 8.25. Interestingly, adolescents and adults average 6 to 7 hours per night. So that's where we get that high sleep deprivation rate among all kids, but the adolescents are definitely not getting enough sleep. So. All right, so how did we get here with all of our issues with sleep? You know, has this always been a problem or has this gotten worse? I think that there's several different culprits to stealing our sleep from us. There's more stimulation in our environment with all of the increase in technology. You know, screen time is a big deal. Even just the light coming off of those screens provides increased stimulation, as well as what kids are watching on their screens. A child's schedule has been shifted to accommodate the adult in their life. So it used to be, I can remember, you know, when I first had kids 18 years ago, Little League and that type of thing in the small town we were living in was all during the day. In fact, I kind of worried, like, how am I ever going to, you know, make it to any of these events? Well, now, you know, all of that has shifted to evening time. So Little League is coming up. And I think, you know, as you involved in those types of activities, you'll see that those schedules do get pretty late. Especially because school isn't over until the end of May. And a lot of that stuff is starting in April and May. So, you know, but even year round, you know, all of the different activities that kids are in. We'll also see, you know, more multiple living situations. So kids going between different homes where their sleep situation might be different in those 2 homes. And if they have an issue with sleep, then changing that environment for them can, you know, make a big difference to them. Environmental noise. So in general, there's just more noise in our environment, outside, inside, you know, TVs, music is on in a lot of our homes all of the time. And so just looking at what that does to our ability to sleep, exposure to violence and noise, and then achievement needs and competition. And that probably, you know, goes along with that schedules around adult availability. So, you know, doing more and more things in the evening, pushing that bedtime later, you know, can be an issue for kids. So we're going to talk about kind of 3 main culprits of sleep deprivation. So tension, you know, we have to be calm enough to sleep. And probably all of us, if I could see a show of hands, have all suffered from a night or maybe several nights of not being able to sleep. And a lot of times that has to do with maybe being worried about something. And so if we aren't calm enough to fall asleep, that's just not going to happen. Our brain needs to feel safe. Ironically, I woke up last night and immediately started thinking about a whole bunch of different things. And it wasn't that I didn't want to sleep, it's that I couldn't sleep because my brain wasn't allowing me to calm down and do that. Okay. And then we look at, you know, the time. Our brains have to know that it's time to sleep. We need regular schedules so that we can set that body clock. And then our temperament or our sensory preferences can also lead into getting a good night's sleep. So sometimes our kids need help in calming down to be able to fall asleep. You'll see a lot of different opinions on whether or not allowing a child to cry to sleep is a good idea. And just like we all have different temperaments and different sensory preferences, that's going to vary for each individual child. But certainly for some kids, that isn't the best way for them to become calm enough to sleep. So. All right, so tension, so I would want to challenge all of you to kind of think about the child that got you here. Why did this webinar pique your interest? There probably was one, maybe two, maybe three kids that you had in mind. So think about the tension in their lives. So there are common tension triggers for distress. And sometimes, I've just listed a few of those here, but parental stress can definitely mirror onto the child. So they can definitely sense our own stress. And so that can be a trigger for them not feeling calm enough to fall asleep. Separations. So, being separated from a parent, maybe it's just you're out for the evening and a babysitter is putting them to bed. That can cause a trigger for distress. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't go out for the evening, but there may be some things that you want to do a little differently in order to decrease that tension. There might have been an upsetting event during the day. So maybe something happened at school, maybe something happened, in the evening when they were at an extracurricular, but being aware of that type of tension is also important. And then major life changes. So, I think we think about as adults what our life changes are, but sometimes those happen to children as well. And realizing that just as that will affect us as the adult, those things also affect them as children. And then lack of sleep continues to lead to lack of sleep. So, it's kind of a cyclical event. So if you have a lack of sleep over and over and over again, you're just in a bad cycle, and that can increase tension. So there's distress, and then there's tension triggers that are excitement. So these are things that aren't necessarily negative in and of themselves, but they can cause tension related to sleep. So overstimulation. So thinking about what are your evening activities like? Is there too much going on for that child? Do they need a longer time to calm down? Some kids can calm down right away, and some kids need a longer time. So thinking about what your evening routine looks like, even really from, a lot of times we'll say a good night's sleep starts in the morning. So thinking about, what are the things that are happening all throughout their day? Is that leading to just a lot of overstimulation, which then is just going to take a lot more work and time to get back down to a calm state of mind. Overscheduling. So again, super fun stuff. There's so many opportunities for our kids, but if there is a sleep concern, you may want to consider how much you're involving your child in, and think about maybe pulling back from some of that type of stuff. Again, I'm not against extracurricular activities. They can be super fun, but just thinking about how much they can really handle, especially at different seasons in their life. Anticipation. So, thinking about something fun that's happening the next day, that can be enough to keep them awake. Growth spurts can interrupt sleep, and then competition or pressure to perform, especially if a lot of these types of activities are happening in the evening right before bed. So time is the other thing that may innocently disrupt the body clock. So here's just a bunch of different kind of things that might happen, so that disrupt our sleep schedule. And so for kids who struggle with sleep, schedules are very important. Remember, I said just 41 minutes of sleep deprivation negatively impacts your ability to attend and pay attention. So changing your wake up times by more than 30 to 60 minute differences between days. So this looks at maybe even you wake up your child 5 days a week, but on the weekend, you let them sleep in, which is maybe necessary for them to catch up on some sleep. But that 30 to 60-minute difference in those wake up times will change their body clock. Skip naps or naps after 3 p.m. So, the question is, okay, my child has a hard time falling asleep. Should we skip naps? No, I don't think we should skip naps, but you want to make sure that you put that nap at the right time. So not having the nap in the later afternoon. Adolescents who nap longer than 40 minutes or a short nap for infants and toddlers, so 20 to 30-minute naps, all of those things change the body clock. A difference in bedtime by 30 to 60 minutes. So this is where, those evening scheduled activities can maybe wreak havoc on the body clock. And again, some of these things are unavoidable. But if you're struggling with your child sleeping, these are some things that you may want to consider adjusting. So being more consistent with that bedtime, being more consistent with your meal times. So, our bodies get very used to when we receive our fuel. And so changing that can impact our ability to fall asleep. And then more than 60 minutes of screen time or electronics in the bedroom or electronics at night, that actually messes with your circadian rhythm. And so the light coming off of those screens tells your brain that it is not time to sleep. And so that's why that screen time is important. Exercising in the evening, so that increases your temperature, your body temperature. And our body temperature actually decreases slightly before bed. And so when we exercise or do a lot of physical activity where we're, sweating and got really warm, that's just another reason our brain needs to kick in to decrease our temperature again. And then caffeine obviously can disrupt our body clock. So I'm not going to read through all of these because they're basically the same things that we just talked about. So, you want to establish regular routines for your kids. I think one thing to especially establish, like for your kids who are still napping, is that they have a regular nap time that's connected to lunch and that the routine is very similar. So even just looking, for different aged children. So typically for a 2-year-old, you want that nap time to be 4 to 5 hours after waking up. And then it'd be 2 to 2.5 hours after waking for babies. Okay. If you are interested in changing the schedule for your child, I always suggest changing it in 15-minute increments. So if you decide after this talk, like, hey, I think we need to start our bedtime an hour earlier, which sometimes is the case, because sometimes maybe, in an effort to get your child to sleep better, you keep them up a little longer, which doesn't necessarily work. But rather than changing that 1 hour time all at once, doing it in 15-minute increments is probably a better idea. And you can also keep that in mind when the time changes occur in the spring and the fall, that you would want to, a couple weeks before that, start to make that adjustment. Okay. All right, so a good night's sleep starts in the morning, so many different things that we want to ask. And sometimes I think I can remember back to the days when my kids were awake in the night and it was frustrating, right? Like I just wanted sleep. And so in the middle of the night, I would lay there and try and problem solve, like how did we get here? What happened? And I would think about just the things that happened right around that time. Or I would think about maybe just the things that happened in the evening. But what I've learned is that a good night's sleep starts from the minute that they wake up. And so in the morning, when your child is waking up, you want to look at, how much light exposure are they getting even in the morning? Are you opening the curtains so that they know that, hey, it's daytime? Get their brain to recognize light as being a sign for being awake. You want to look at the protein intake that they're getting all day long. So, having a good breakfast in the morning with protein, snacks throughout the day, lunch and evening meals, again, including that protein, because you want the blood sugars to be regular. So you don't want your child possibly waking up because they're hungry or that their blood sugar has dropped. So looking at regular intervals and not just a snack before bed, but looking at how their nutrition is. And then, thinking about too, the nap time and the routines, that type of thing, and realizing that, it may be okay to wake your child up in order to establish that routine, that's an okay thing to do. And yeah, just being really aware and cognizant of that awake routine and the bedtime routine. So establishing routines. Again, this is just a really good way to help your child realize that it's time for sleep. So we talk about these 4 points. So the transition activity. So this might be the things that you do prior to maybe even going into the bedroom. So, maybe you're out in the living room, you can dim the lights to, again, get their brain ready for the fact that it's darker and that it's becoming time to sleep. So in the summer, when it's light out longer, you may need to pull the blinds, pull the curtains, and, transition them to that darkness. You might want to do a reading activity, maybe clean up. Some kids need that heavy work and just really prepare for bed. And then you move into the calm and connect stage. So this might be, depending on your child, you guys know your kids best, but how can you get them to calm and connect? Is it a massage? We receive so many good endorphins through our skin that oftentimes, a deep massage, avoiding tickling, can be a good way to connect with your child and to help them calm. Some kids do good with talking about things that have maybe triggered the tension in their day, or doing like a worrying journal, something like that to get it out. But doing something that helps them calm. And then you've got the cue for sleep. So, these are all things that trigger their brain to know, okay, now it's getting really close to sleep time. So maybe they listen to a sound machine or have a fan. You're going to want to turn that on. You're going to want to turn off the lights. If they sleep with a night light, you can turn that on. It's important though to keep that environment in which they fall asleep the same in case they wake up in the night. So if you've got children who are waking up in the night, think about how is the environment the same or different from when you put them in their bed. So if they listen to music when they fall asleep, you might want to put that on repeat so that if they start to wake up in the night, the environment is the same. That way, again, it provides some safety for their brain. Like they realize, oh, hey, I'm in my bed. It's just like it was when my mom or dad left, and helps them maybe fall back to sleep without fully waking up in the middle of the night. And then working towards switching to sleep. So, we want that child to be able to fall asleep on their own. And that was a question I had received prior. So how do you get your child to fall asleep on their own? Some kids need a parent to lay next to them. And if it's not your goal to be next to them, if they wake up in the night, if that's an issue, then you're going to want to maybe put like a body pillow or something between you and your child so that they recognize the environment as being the same. Or maybe instead of lying next to them, you lie on the floor and you maybe gradually kind of move yourself out of the room, as the days go on, but they get used to the fact that you're not maybe quite as close as what you were before, but then always realizing that you may need to go in and calm them down if that causes a lot of increased stress for them. Okay, so I'm not going to talk a ton about sensory preferences. or temperament, but be aware that all of us have different sensory preferences. So what might be calming for me may not be the same thing that's calming for my child. And so just being aware that sometimes, you know, like for me, wrestling and doing a lot of heavy work isn't what my brain and body need, but for a sensory seeker, they may need to do that prior to bed. So, you know, doing some investigation and thinking about your child and their sensory preferences and how that might be different than you may be helpful for providing some ways for them to calm. If you've listened to one of my sensory processing talks, I use this chart a lot. It's by Patricia Otter, another occupational therapist, and it just looks at our sensory motor preferences from a calming to alerting standpoint. So if we look at things that we know are calming to our brain are things that are easy to process. So taste and smell and oral texture is much easier for our brain to process than visual and auditory information. And so it's going to be much more calming. And so, you know, even looking at how a baby learns how to calm themselves, they learn how to suck on something sweet, and that's kind of the first way they learn to regulate. And so even thinking about bedtime snacks, you know, maybe giving your child something to suck through a straw, a protein smoothie, something a little bit thicker, provides joint and muscle activity that you'll see in that tactile column. And all of those things would be much more calming than, you can look down at the bottom. So as we go across this screen, this page, auditory and visual are the most difficult things for our brains to process. So those are going to be much more alerting. So, you know, there are times where kids will fall asleep to listening to a story or, you know, listening to music, but a story technically is going to be much more alerting than rhythmical music or even like a sound machine. So vibration sounds are going to be much more calming. So just, you know, thinking about their environment and how you set that up from a stimulating to a calming standpoint. So, and then realizing that joint and muscle activity right there in the middle is very organizing for our brain. So that's why, you know, deep pressure, heavy touch, massage is going to be an organizing thing for our brain to help us calm to fall to sleep. All right. Looking at the nest. So the nest is really where the child needs to sleep. And so, you know, if your child's having a hard time falling asleep, you may want to think about, what is the environment like? You know, I've suggested before to parents, climb into their bed, experience it. Is it comfortable? You know, what types of things are they seeing in the shadows? You know, are there sounds that they might be hearing, you know, that maybe you don't hear when you're not laying in their bed? And so really kind of investigating and making sure that that's a safe and comfortable place where their bodies will and brains will allow them to sleep. You have to feel safe in order to fall asleep. And if our nest doesn't allow us to feel safe, then we may need to change something about it. Okay. The abdominal sleep reflex is a natural sleep position that helps our brains fall asleep. And so this has been something that we've recently added, not recently, maybe a few years now, to our occupational therapy practice. So this is something that we can assess to determine if this is impacting a child's ability to sleep. And then there's a specialized massage technique that releases melatonin to the brain to help with sleep. So when I work with families and when our OTs are evaluating kids, sleep is always something that needs to be addressed, even if the main complaints are things that are happening during the day. Because again, remember, sleep and being alert are on opposite sides of the continuum. So we can't adequately address attention issues without knowing what's happening at sleep and bedtime. So the abdominal sleep reflex is just another tool to be able to help parents with kids falling asleep. So I'd be happy to answer more questions about that at some point too. So just wanted to bring it up to make you aware. So, and then again, thinking about screen time in the morning and at night. So really wanting to limit that screen time and thinking about, how we're getting our brains ready for the day and then ready for night. So it's a hard thing to do. Trust me, I know. But realizing that if your kids are having some difficulty with sleep, looking at, are they looking at screens in that 1 to 2 hour time frame before bed? And then what are they doing first thing in the morning? So the truth about baths. So oftentimes we feel like baths can be a really calming way to prepare for sleep. But that isn't always the case with everyone, right? So sometimes our kids get really, really excited about bath time, and it can be overstimulating. The other thing that happens with a bath is that if the water is warm enough, again, our body temperature increases. And remember what I said about exercise. Our brain's body temperature naturally decreases at bedtime, so we don't want to externally cause that to happen. So when I work with families struggling with sleep, if a bath is right before bed, I oftentimes will suggest that we move that, to a couple hours before bedtime instead. To nap or not to nap? That's the question, right? So if you've got little ones who are struggling with sleep, our first inclination is to take away the nap. But I would encourage you not to do that immediately and to realize, looking at how many hours of sleep your child should be getting, a nap is a good way to get to that. And so if you feel like the nap is messing with your child's schedule, maybe you just want to move the nap a little earlier, or make sure that you aren't allowing it to extend beyond that 3 o'clock time. But I would encourage you to keep the nap in there. It can, again, just be a good way to not, get to the evening and have the child be overtired. So I just love this little meme. Do I co-sleep? No, my kid co-sleeps and I co-lay awake and get kicked in the spleen. So, I get asked questions about that. Is it okay if my child sleeps with me? Well, that's really up to you, right? And so there's plenty of families out there that do co-sleep, and that's perfectly fine if that's what you want to have happen. But if it's not, then I think there's, specific steps that you can take to get your child to sleep independently. And we've talked a lot about the keys to probably getting to sleep. So now I want to look at some of those things, keys to staying asleep. So when we see a child who has a hard time falling asleep, I think, we looked at the tension, the time, the temperament, those things that impact a child's ability to fall asleep. So perhaps, if we talk about kind of this just right level of regulation, when they're having trouble falling asleep, it's probably because they're too over aroused. And so their brain is needing to come back down to fall asleep. Well, when we see kids who are having trouble staying asleep, we have to wonder if maybe now, instead of them being at that just right level of regulation, going to bed at the right time, perhaps they're overtired and their level of regulation is in that low category. So now you've got a brain that's overtired and it's in that low regulation, and their brain is waking them up to try and get them to that just right level of regulation. And so, when we see a child who's having difficulty staying asleep, I often ask questions and wonder about whether or not maybe they went to bed too late. And so, again, that's a hard thing to do, right? You're struggling with your child staying asleep. So our natural thing is to maybe push that bedtime back, right? Or kids who are waking up too early, we want to push that bedtime back. But if you put a child to sleep when they are under aroused and overtired, then they maybe will crash to sleep. They might fall asleep better, but their brain is going to wake them up so that they get to that just right level. The other thing, again, I talked a little bit about this, the environment should be the same when they fall asleep as when they might be waking up. So thinking about all of the things, the lighting, the sounds, the what they're sleeping with, whether it's a parent or a stuffed animal or a blanket, trying to keep that the same. So if you're using music, put it on repeat so that they'll wake up to it in the night and perhaps not get fully woken up and fully aroused so that they can fall asleep more easily. Okay. Respecting the child's clock. So again, looking at, do I need to actually, maybe put them to bed earlier? So if you look at all of those symptoms I listed in the beginning of the presentation, are you seeing some of those things? Is your child overly tired? And then do we need to perhaps change their clock so that they're getting more sleep and keeping those routines? It's easy to avoid your bedtime routines, especially when you're rushed. Maybe you are out, at an activity and you get home and you want to hurry up and get your kids to bed. I would encourage you not to avoid the routine altogether, but maybe you just shorten each little aspect of the routine so that you still have those same cues for falling asleep, but they're just not quite as long. And then what do you do when your kid does wake up in the night, right? What are some things to do? If you know that your child easily gets overstimulated, over aroused, probably letting them cry is not maybe the best option, because that's just going to continue to wake them up more and more and more. So, going into their room, giving them some cues, making them feel safe, and, providing that calming that they need. Perhaps, you've gotten to the point where your child's waking up so regularly at a very normal time. It might not hurt for you to maybe try and stay awake until that time, or, get yourself into the room and anticipate that so that you can lull them back to sleep a little bit more quickly than you being in a deep sleep, needing to hear them cry. Maybe they've cried for, a few minutes before you actually wake up to hear them. But, trying to kind of train their brain to fall back to sleep. And again, provide that deep pressure, heavy touch, which is very calming. So, doing like a little, some circular massage on their back can be a very good way to help them with that. So, okay. This is a QR code that you can scan if you found some of this to be interesting and you'd like more opportunity to perhaps, have a free screen from one of our occupational therapists. We have OT in Ames, Des Moines, Newton, Oski, and Pella. And, we'd be happy to work with you on these things. And so we schedule free screens that are 20 minutes in length. And it's just an opportunity to determine, is there something that maybe occupational therapy could be helpful with? So, and then this is also my email address and clinic phone number if you have additional questions, but we have plenty of time right now for questions. So click away, ask the questions in the chat. And I'm hoping that I answered the questions that were emailed to us. I know one of them was had to do with, let me find those here a minute, had to do with a child who kept waking up. And so hopefully I gave you some ideas for that. Yeah, falling asleep on their own without parent laying next to them. So again, that may take some training. And so I think, if that's been your routine, trying to put something between you and the child. So, maybe a body pillow or just a regular pillow so that there's a little bit of distance. And so you start with that and you maybe do that for a night or two. And then you maybe go down to the floor. And so now your child's used to you being on the floor. And then you're there for a couple nights, and then maybe you get closer to the door, and then maybe you're outside the door. And so you just, kind of gradually do that sleep training. So, and then looking at all of the other reasons why your child might need you there, so looking at the environment and looking at some of those other things. Are screenings offered virtually? Absolutely. Yep. We'd be happy to do that. We do telehealth evaluations as well. So if you're a ways away from our clinics, we'd be happy to do a virtual screen. So you can either use the QR code to request that, or you can just email me directly. Okay, so a 3-year-old wakes at the same time every night. Sometimes he goes back to bed quickly, and other times has a full tantrum, and we struggle with staying calm for him because we know he just needs to sleep, but waking is at around the same time nightly. Yeah, so that's a case where if you know that it's going to be around the same time, I would anticipate that. And maybe, sounds crazy, maybe set your alarm so that you can go in there and be right there so that he doesn't maybe progress to that full tantrum. But I would wonder too, like maybe he's going to bed and he's overtired. So what would happen if you moved his bedtime up 15 minutes, and how would that look? So I think, there could be some benefit in exploring some of those other things. Yeah. And, it sounds like, if you'd want to visit some more, me having a little more information might be helpful. But, I think the fact that that's happening over and over again maybe tells us a little something about maybe his arousal level. And, there can be some real good benefits to melatonin. And that's where that like abdominal sleep technique might be helpful because it naturally releases melatonin. And I would love to be able to share that all with you right now, but there's a lot of protection around that because of the MNRI who teaches it. So that's just a one-on-one thing that we have to go over. So let's see. Trying to see if there's additional questions. I think too, when you've got a child who's waking up, regularly like that too, think about maybe, do a review, a scan of the environment, is it the same as when you put him to sleep? You're exactly right. He does need sleep. And so, but you being that calming source to him. So trying to just get in there as quick as you can. I'd also wonder too about like a snack, is he eating a bedtime snack prior to bed? Because that, could be something too that would regulate the blood sugar levels, because that can be a reason too why kids are waking in the night. So, let's see. Okay. What if the toddler is waking up to a bad dream, crying, but not necessarily awake while being consoled? Yeah, so that, we have issues with kids who come and see us like with night terrors and that type of thing. I'd say you definitely still, if it's a night terror, you'd probably want to try and wake the child, but even though they aren't awake, I would still continue to provide that deep pressure, heavy touch, because that's going to release those endorphins to the brain to help them hopefully through that bad dream. So continuing to do that would be what I would do. I mean, anything you can do to make the child feel safe, for sure. 3-year-old wakes up between 3 and 5, has to use the bathroom, and has trouble falling back to sleep. And some nights she just lays awake for the rest of the night. Yeah, poor kiddo. Again, that's the thing where it's not that she doesn't want to sleep, but she can't fall asleep, right? So I guess I wonder, like, what's your bedtime routine like? So are there, are there things that you could replicate, as hard as that would be at 3 a.m, but that, would give her some of those cues that it's time to go back to sleep? That would maybe be one of them. And then, yeah, just providing some of those so that her brain gets the cue that it's not, morning time, trying to keep the lights as low and, so that doesn't mess with her brain thinking that it's time to wake up. So doing as much as you can in the dark with that. So is it possible that you think a child sleeps well, but some of the behaviors you mentioned for tension and stressors got me thinking that maybe he doesn't sleep as well as you thought? Absolutely. And so that's why I hope that if any of you have worked with me, at least, that I've asked you about sleep, because, even there's so many things that kids get labeled with or, diagnosed with without even questioning whether or not there's good sleep happening. And really, I mean, I've got 2 kids and I don't know that I've ever really noted whether or not they're sleeping well. We'll go to a hotel and then I realize, oh, he's talks in his sleep, or wow, he's really restless, or, different things like that. And so I think it's just always a thing to consider, something to think about. And again, you really can't look at arousal level without looking at sleep level. The two just have to go hand in hand. So is this being offered again at another time for others who may want to view the info? I do these little webinars just kind of randomly, but we are recording it. So I will send out an email recording, a link, and you can share that with whomever you want. So, yep. All right. See, I think I got a couple more questions here. My 5-year-old oftentimes needs a snack or claims to be hungry before bed. Is that normal? Definitely, especially if your meal time was a couple hours prior to that. And so I would probably offer them a snack, especially a healthy, protein-rich snack, because that's going to help them stay asleep, hopefully. And, I was always one, my kids probably thought I was great because we would do a lot of protein smoothies through straws, because sucking is a calming activity. And so, or they'd maybe have some yogurt, like the Go-Gurts or whatever that they could suck. So I think that can be a very normal thing to be happening. All right. Any other questions? You guys have been awesome. This has been really fun. Okay. I think I got that. Okay. So if there aren't any other questions, then I will end this. But again, there's my email address. So please feel free to email me any questions, or if you had some but you didn't feel like asking in front of the whole group, totally understand that. But I'm passionate about helping parents, and I do feel like nothing good happens when people aren't sleeping, right? Like, even I'm a little tired today. And so I just know the importance of getting good sleep. And if your kids aren't sleeping, chances are you're not sleeping well either. And so, if you need help with that, seek that out. I think, it's a valuable thing to get improved, to improve everybody's quality of life. So anyway, all right. Thank you so much.